Rome. We associate the culture with warmth and sunlight, happiness and vitality. Yet in ancient times, the Romans felt a deep connection between life and death. Preserving the memories of the deceased was integral to the livelihoods of the generations to come. And we can see this in the excavated ruins of the port city of ancient Rome, Ostia Antica.
Death and burial was a big part of life in Ostia Antica, in any Roman city. In antiquity, the tendency in Greek and Roman cities was to bury the dead outside the city walls, primarily for sanitation purposes, but also because so many people are being cremated. That's the traditional way in which people are disposed of, and that means you're going to have fires, and fires are always dangerous. So you want to keep that kind of danger activity limited to outside the city. In the early history of Rome, you have a coexistence of the use of inhumation and cremation. And over time, the cremation wins out. In fact, when we look at really prominent tombs, when the population is really booming, you have, in the period of Augustus, the Columbaria. The Columbaria tombs are for housing many, many people. It's for placing an urn or two in a niche, and you put a cover on top of that niche, and then when you come to make an offering to the deceased, you can actually pour in an offering through a little slit in the cover over top where these jars are, and in the jars are the ashes of the deceased. So this phenomenon becomes really, really popular at the end of the 1st century BC, basically in the Augustan age. And these things, these structures are mass produced. And the Via Ostiense leading into the Porta Romana, that leading into Ostia Antica, is filled with these kinds of tombs. But in the end, if you look at the structure, it's like a house in miniature. 1 or 2 rooms, and then the walls are lined with these niches where you're going to place the urns with the ashes. But everything's in miniature. The space itself is not that large, 20 feet by 20 feet, for example. And then you've got a little, even abbreviated door. It's not the full height, but it's reduced. Over time, you get the rise in the use of inhumation again, particularly with the 2nd century AD and the 3rd century AD, and you get the sarcophagus, this box, this flesh eater it's called, that you can place more than one individual in. And sometimes with great wealth, you can have massive, monumental sarcophagi. Or if you don't have that much money, you can have a sarcophagus made of terracotta or wood. Usually the people are buried outside the city walls for hygienic purposes, because of the risk of fire if you're going to be cremating a lot of bodies. But there are exceptions, and those individuals are allowed by the local senate to place the tomb of somebody really important even within the city walls. And it's the exception that really then stands out, and it says, this individual did so much for the city, we are going to honor him or her by giving him or her a place of prominence within the city of the living. This tomb right here is one of the largest in the city of Ostia. We don't have the full height of this particular tomb, but it was massive and it was very tall. In fact, you have a kind of a square base here with some projecting arms, and then you have on top of that a space for a cylinder with a diameter of at least 5 meters. So it's going to end up being quite tall and quite visible. So ships passing by would see this monument from a great distance. And therefore, as they arrived into the harbor of Ostia, they would say, there's somebody, there's a prominent citizen of Ostia. There are a lot of activities associated with the dead. So you've got the lying in state. You can have the body presented in the forum of a city. The Roman funerary procession became very elaborate. Of course, it always depends on what kind of clout you had, how much money you had, but ultimately it can be very elaborate, and the procession can go through the city and then out of the city to where the body is going to be laid to rest. The body is going to be consumed by flames, and then afterwards people can visit them on holidays, anniversaries, and there of course are religious festivals where you're going to be commemorating the dead. So a typical kind of experience going out to the tombs of the ancestors is to visit the specific one of your family, and then you're going to be saying prayers, you're going to be pouring libations, you're literally pouring the liquid like wine into a receptacle that can be in the ground. It can even be in the slit over top the urn with the deceased ashes and remains. You can also offer barley cakes, little sweets to the spirits of the ancestors as well. So you're pouring your libations, you can burn some incense, you can say some prayers, and ultimately in the columbarium settings, you either go to an upper floor where there's a terrace where you're all going to gather together and have a meal, or it's going to be in some space next to the tomb. These were social occasions. These were structures that invited you to participate and be part of that history. And that's what a lot of the ancient world was about. It wasn't about, I'm going into heaven or I'm going to hell. It's, I want to be remembered. The preservation of memory is key.